welcome! In today's video I'm going to be making donuts. I actually filmed most of this video several weeks ago, during which I let you know I normally use my bread machine to mix my donut dough. It is so wonderful and convenient, but I am aware that many people will not have the luxury of a bread machine to make their donut dough, but would still love delicious homemade donuts. So today I'm going to make my donuts by hand and not using my bread machine, to give you a guide that you can follow to make donuts at home yourself. I'm using exactly the same ingredients, and I've actually written down a list of the various stages my bread machine goes through when it's mixing the dough. And that's what I'll be following today. So in my bowl I've already weighed out 1 pound of strong bread flour, to which I'm going to add 2 ounces of margarine or butter, and I'm going to rub that in as though I were making a pastry. It shouldn't take very long because there's lots of flour and only a small proportion of margarine. Now to my breadcrumby mixture, I'm going to add half a teaspoon of salt and 2 tablespoons of caster sugar. If you haven't got caster sugar, normal granulated will work. And just give that a gentle stir in with a knife. And then the all-important yeast. I'm using 1 7-gram sachet of dried yeast, so that'll go in next. And just like our salt and sugar, we'll stir it in. I'm going to make a little dent in the middle of my flour so I can put the egg in that dent. Next I'm going to add a room temperature egg. Because we're making a yeast based dough, I think it's quite important that your egg be at room temperature and not freezing cold straight out the fridge. If all your eggs are kept in the fridge, it'll still work perfectly well. It'll just take longer for your dough to rise because you've chilled down that yeast. And to that I'm also going to add 5 ounces of milk. Now I have pre-warmed my milk. I popped it in the microwave for a moment just so it's nice and cosy. You don't want it too hot though, because we don't want to kill off that yeast. We just want a nice warm environment for it to be working in. In goes the milk. And I'm going to stir that in with my knife to start with. And once it starts binding together to make a dough, we'll be in with our hands and kneading it about. I'm going to clear down my work surface so I've got some room for kneading my dough. It's out the way. I'm still a bit dry and dusty. I'm going to bring this, knead it in the bowl until we've got 1 lump of dough. We're going to need to knead this mixture for the next 10 minutes. So I'm 5 past at the moment, so at 1/4 I can stop kneading the mix. It's going to be 10 minutes of kneading now, then we'll let it rest for 10 minutes, and then we'll do a second 10 minutes of kneading before it gets an hour to rest. There, 1 lump of dough. I'll have all my crumbs. I'm going to keep my bowl because I want to put my dough back into that to rest in a moment. So this is the point when you get a real good workout stretching and kneading that dough. For anyone that hasn't kneaded a dough before, I'm kind of grabbing hold of it and pushing away from myself with the heel of my hand, stretching it out, and then I pull it back on itself and stick it down, turn it round a bit and push and stretch, and the other hand push and stretch and push and stretch. And just 10 minutes of that. We'll be ready for a cup of tea. At this point, you want to make sure you have somewhere warm for your dough to rise. I've actually switched my oven on at its very lowest temperature. And when I'm ready for my dough to start rising, I'll switch the oven off completely and pop it in there nice and cosy to get to do its rising. Notice I didn't add any flour to my work surface. The dough is lifting off quite nicely. You don't have to be kneading it fast and at speed, just constantly working away, stretching and squishing and stretching and squishing. Yay, 1/4 I can stop. So now we've been kneading our dough for 10 minutes. I'm going to pop it back into its mixing bowl. Cover it with a clean tea towel or some cling film. And I'm going to pop that somewhere nice and warm for 10 minutes to let it rest. And then we'll be back to do another 10 minutes of bashing and kneading. Here we are after our first 10-minute rest. Time to do our second 10 minutes of kneading. If you find that your dough is sticking to the work surface, don't put some flour down, this will dry things out too much. Add a little oil to the work surface and your hands, and things should start slipping around quite nicely for you then. So now to knead our dough for its second 10 minutes, we'll pop it back in the bowl just like before and put it in its warm spot to rest once again. But this time we leave it to rest for an hour. So it should be nice and fluffy when we come back. After that hour's resting, we'll just do one last quick kneading of dough, and it gets a second hour of rest. Yay! I'm not used to this. There we go. I'm really glad I did this though, because one day my bread machine will break down on me, because that's what machines do. And I'll be back to making bread and doughnuts by hand. And it's nice to be able to do that. So back into the bowl it goes. Cover it up again. And this time we're going to leave it for an hour. So we'll be back in an hour, and then it's just a quick beating, just to knock the air out. So we'll see you in an hour. Okay, we've been an hour in our nice warm place, and our dough has got big and fluffy. Ooh, and all soft and bubbly. It won't take much of a knead now. We just want to squish out all that air really and bring it back to a small little lump of dough again. And then back into our bowl for another hour. So I've just squished out all the air, beaten it down, back in the bowl, cover it up, tuck it in, and we'll come back in an hour to shape it into our donut shapes. So now our dough has had its second hour resting. It's all fluffy again, and we'll take you back to my original video that made the dough in the bread machine, because from now on the steps are going to be exactly the same, and I'll get on and make this into donuts for today. Delicious! Hello and welcome! Today here in the kitchen I'm going to be making donuts. I will let you know right at the start, I have a couple of cheats making my donuts. I use my bread machine to make my dough, and I use my plant propagator as a proving oven once I've cut my donut shapes. So the recipe I'm using today might not be suitable for those of you who want to make the donuts by hand kneading and proving in a bowl. So if you want to skip off now, that's absolutely fine. Or you can stay and watch me anyway, because I'm glad to have you along. So to start my donuts, I've got the mixing tub from my bread machine and 5 ounces of milk. Pour that in first, to which I'm going to add 2 ounces of butter or margarine. I've cubed it up into little pieces so that I can spread it throughout the mixing pan, get a more even distribution quicker when it starts mixing things up. I didn't warm or heat my milk, it's just milk straight out of the fridge. The same with my butter. My bread machine will spend some time warming things up before it starts mixing it all together. So into my milk and bread, I'm going to put 1 egg. Let's hope I don't get any shell in it. There we go. In goes our egg. And 1 pound of strong white flour, bread making flour. It needs to be strong flour or it won't work. When we don't want standard plain or self-raising, it's very important that we use a bread flour when we're making yeast based products. So in goes our pound of flour, 450 grams I think it is, but I would have to check that. Oh, it doesn't want to go in. And I'm sprinkling that along the whole area of my bread mixing box. I'm just going to use my hand to level out my flour a bit, so I have a sort of flat surface of flour, just to keep things a bit level in the pan. Actually, I'll do my salt first. I've got 1/4 teaspoon of salt. I'm going to sprinkle that along the surface, and 2 tablespoons of caster sugar. I'm sure a granulated sugar would be fine, but I have caster sugar, so I'm going to use it. And there's my 2nd tablespoon. And our last ingredient, and most importantly of all, 7 grams, or what is generally 1 sachet of dried yeast. It comes in fine powdery granules in the packet, and I'm just going to sprinkle that around the surface as well, just to give a more even mixing when it starts to bind things up. And that's it, all my ingredients in. I'm going to pop this in my bread machine and set my machine to make dough. Because I don't want it cooking today, it's not making the loaf of bread in the machine. I just want it to mix and prove and rise the dough. So in about 2 hours, we'll see you back here, and our dough should be all nice and lovely and fluffy and doughy, ready to make our donuts. Hello and welcome back. My bread machine has just been beeping at me to let me know my donut dough is ready. So before I take it out, I'm going to put some oil on 2 baking sheets, ready to put my donuts out onto. I've got myself a 3-inch flat-sided pastry cutter and a little shot glass to cut my donut holes out with. But you can use any size you like. Now I'm going to oil my trays rather than the usual greaseproof paper. So I'm going to sprinkle some light olive oil. It doesn't matter what sort of oil you use. And I'm going to spread that oil, splat, all over my trays to make them nice and slippy. So my donuts will be easy to handle when I'm taking them off and putting them in the fryer later. So that's tray number 1 and tray number 2. And while my dough was cooking, I've prepared my plant propagator to use as a proving oven for my doughnuts. I've evicted my onion seedlings and given it a wash, a good wipe down, and I've also put a wire cooling rack on the inside so that when I put my donut trays on it, they're not actually touching the heat plate that is at the bottom of the propagator. They're just slightly off of that, basically floating in mid-air. So that's my proving oven. Your propagator sits about all year and only gets used for a couple of months in the early spring. So why not use it all year round for raising and proving your donuts, your bread, your cinnamon rolls. I also use it for making yoghurt in. I'll mix my yoghurt starter culture with milk and place it in here nice and warm. It works a treat. Make good use of my propagator. So I'm getting good all year round use of my plant propagator. Now I've not wiped the oil off my hands, I'm still all greasy. Boing. Actually, I'm going to put a little bit of that on my work surface and slide that around as well so my dough won't stick. There we go, see if that stays. There's my cutters. So let's get this dough out and see how it's doing. Wonderful. Big lump of lovely fluffy donut dough. Now we want to be gentle with our dough. And pull my paddles out of it. Move that there. We don't want to be beating it around. We want to be as little handling as we can possibly get away with. And I'm just squishing it out to about 3/4 of an inch thick. And if it's an inch thick, it's fine. You don't need to be precise. And just give it a second or two to relax. And then in with our pastry cutter. So the big one first. And while it's still there, I'm going to squash my little one into the middle. And it's a little bit harder to do that one because it's not actually a pastry cutter. It's the little shot glass. And lift them off. And there we have our first donut and our donut hole. Now I'm going to use my donut holes to cook as little donut holes. I want to handle this dough as little as possible, so I don't want to be reincorporating my donut holes back into the dough and rolling them out to make more donuts. They just get tough and chewy and not as pleasant. Oh, that one's a struggle. Heave. There we go. And pop out our hole and our donut. That's a fat donut. Lovely. The reason for allowing your dough to just rest for a second once you've flattened it out, relax and spring back, is because otherwise when you cut your circles and lift your cutters out, your dough will contract and shrink back into that smaller size. So we want to let it be at its perfect sizing before you start slicing into it. That's our first tray of donuts and holes, ready to go in the prover. Now my dough that I've got left, I will bring this together as gently as I can and squish it out to make another tray of donuts. But like I say, I don't want to use my holes back into this mixture because they do get tougher with working, so we don't want to be messing around with it if we can help it. So let's put those in the propagator and get our next tray. They're going to need to be in there for about an hour till they've doubled in size. It could be an hour and a half. Just depends on the temperature of the day around you. If you don't have a propagator, which lots of you won't have, your next best option is to turn on your oven at its lowest setting. Then when your donut rings are ready to go in the proving oven, switch your oven off and pop them inside that nice warm oven and shut the door. and hopefully that should be just the perfect temperature to allow your doughnuts to rise to nice fluffy doughnuts. Now I have a second propagator that's all prepared just like the one I've shown you, ready for these to go into, because I grow lots of plants and like having two propagators to keep me going. Oh, I forgot to put the middles on those. Let's put them back in the centre. Too busy talking. There we go. Hey, and cut out the middle. Cut out me holes. This last little bit of dough I've got left, I'm not going to shape it into anything. I'm just breaking it into pieces, and I'll put it on the tray to prove along with the doughnuts. And these can be my tester strips when we start frying them in the oil, because the first one's always a bit iffy till you get your temperatures just perfectly ready. So I'll put these in my other propagator, and we'll be back with you in an hour, hour and a half, when these are all risen and fluffy and ready to be deep fried. Yum, can't wait. And here we are back. My doughnuts are almost ready for deep frying now, so I'm preparing my workspace, ready to make them crisp and toasty and delicious. I've put a litre of oil in a saucepan, ready to deep fry my doughnuts. You could use a fat if you want. I choose oil, but anything you would normally deep fry your chips in is going to be suitable to deep fry your doughnuts in. So I've got my pan of oil at the ready, and I'm just going to use 2 forks to move them around in the oil, flip them over and lift them out. So I've got 2 dinner forks, and I've got myself 2 dinner plates. One I'm going to line with 2 sheets of kitchen paper to absorb the excess oil or fat when they first come out the frying pan, and a plate to put my finished doughnuts on. And I've prepared myself 2 different bowls of sugars. I've got one bowl that I've just filled with plain caster sugar for dipping the doughnuts in, and a second bowl, which is not necessary but optional. I've put 5 tablespoons of caster sugar in this one, and I'm going to add a tablespoon of cinnamon and stir that all in. And I'm going to make my doughnut holes, that's the circle bits that come out the middle, cinnamon doughnuts. But I'm going to leave my doughnut rings as a standard ring doughnut. So I'm simply going to mix my sugar and cinnamon together to give us a lovely strong cinnamon sugar to go on our doughnuts. That's me ready for frying. So let's move you over to the cooker and you can watch the doughnuts cook. Oh, I'll show you how they're looking. There we go. Lovely puffy doughnuts, ready for the fryer. Yoo-hoo! Pop them back in the warmer second till my fat warms up. Right, my doughnuts are ready. My oil's starting to shimmer, so I'm hoping it might be ready. Let's get a doughnut piece, the last little bits when we'd finished cutting out, and we can use that to test the temperature of our oil. So I've got a tiny doughnut bit, and usually I'm too cold when I start. The moment it goes in, it should start to fizz and bubble. It's definitely not fizzing and bubbling. This oil is not hot enough yet. My tester is just starting to brown. Took a bit longer to get hot than I hoped it would. So I'd say my oil is ready. I'm going to turn my temperature down. Now we've got it hot, because I don't want to get it any hotter and start burning things. I just want to keep it at this lovely perfect cooking temperature. So let's lift out that tester, a bit pale still, and get ourselves some doughnuts. Doughnuts, yay! So in goes our first doughnut, and very gently drop it into the oil. And you need to be gentle because you don't want to splash and end up burning your fingers. I've got room in my pan for 2 of our fluffy doughnuts. Oh, sizzling beautifully. How are we doing? Let's flip this one over. We're starting to change colour, not quite golden enough yet. This cooking stage is pretty quick. After all those hours of waiting, while the dough made and the doughnuts proved, this cooking bit's really very quick. Oh, wrong way around. The forks are handy because you can hook up a whole doughnut and onto the kitchen paper to drain. Let the excess fat or oil drip off, lay them on your paper, and in go your next doughnuts. I'm going to do donuts and a couple of donut holes this time. Again, be very gentle placing them in the oil because it is, woo! She says throwing one in. It is seriously hot. Can I bring that over here? Yes, sugar. So while our donuts are cooking off, I'll take our first donuts, still very hot, and dip them in the caster sugar. And I like to just pour some sugar on them so it can trickle in that hole at the middle. Make sure the whole donut's completely covered. Dust it around the edge. One wonderful hot sugared donut. Homer Simpson would be proud. Yeah, this one's ready. Out we come. The holes are a bit more difficult. They tend to roll about on the fork. Woo, like that. It's probably the one I threw in the pan. There we go. And not to waste anything, I'm putting all our bits of donut in, because they'll taste just as delicious even if they are an odd shape. So there we have it. Wonderful, fresh, hot, homemade sugared donuts. They are definitely at their very best today, now, while they're fresh and hot and delicious. But you can leave them to cool and glaze them rather than dipping them in sugar if you prefer, or just eat them plain if you don't want all that sugar in your diet. They will keep for 3 or 4 days in a sealed container, and I find the best way to freshen them up if you've stored them is to pop them in a microwave, literally, woo, for a few 10-second blasts, just to warm them through. You get that lovely fresh hot donut taste all over again. Now my recipe made 10 donuts and obviously 10 donut holes and half a dozen little scrappy bits that taste just as delicious. So I have cinnamon donut holes, sugar donut rings, and a mouthful of donut. Now the caster sugar you have left will be very slightly oily, so I wouldn't advise putting it back into the sugar pot with all the other sugars. It's perfectly fine to use it over the next however long in your teas and coffees, or add it to the next cake that you're baking. It's perfectly good usable sugar. I just wouldn't mix it with all the fresh sugar in your sugar pot. And as for the cinnamon sugar that I have left over, I'm going to put that into this little jar to store it. And again, it is delicious used in my coffee rather than a standard sugar, and gives me a lovely cinnamon coffee. Or I can keep it till I next make cinnamon donuts and it'll be fine. Or any recipe that requires cinnamon and sugar, I could put this in as a substitute. Maybe a spiced fruit cake. I could use my cinnamon sugar instead of the sugar that the recipe asks for. Just adding that little extra touch of spice to an already lovely spicy cake. So that's me today. See you next time. And remember, whatever you're doing, have fun doing it. Bye for now. If you've enjoyed today's video, don't forget to click that like button and let me know. Click subscribe and YouTube will make sure you see my next video. So bye for now and we'll see you next time. And don't forget, whatever you're doing, have fun doing it.